want to welcome to the program right now the division of the director, rather, of nra-ila's grassroots division, Mr. Glen Caroline. Glen, how are you, sir?
I'm great, Cam. Thanks again for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thrilled to have you talk about this debate at the University of Tennessee. First of all, I got to say, Glen, I'm thrilled that you were invited to a debate at the University of Tennessee. I didn't realize that there were still colleges and universities out there that were allowing debate on issues like gun ownership.
You know, it's interesting. It would happen more often than you would think. Most of the time, the debates and discussions I do are right here in the D.C. area, but on occasion I do get invited outside of the area to speak to interested students, and this was part of a program called Conscious Campus that I think are going to try to make this a fairly regular feature, to have myself and an opponent on the other side travel to some targeted campuses across the country to try to engage students in the debate, which I think is a very good idea.
Absolutely. All right. So you were debating a gentleman named Juan Pacheco, as a former gang member, a speaker for a group called the Peace Warriors Network. Was there an actual argument that you all were debating? Was it about gun ownership or guns of self-defense, or was it just a general sort of free-form debate around the gun issues?
It was a little bit of both. It was the generic gun control debate where we talk about the pros and cons of gun ownership and the merits or lack thereof of passing gun control laws as an impediment to criminals getting guns. Juan is a really good guy with just an inspiring story about how he transformed his life getting out of a gang lifestyle, and he does a fantastic job now engaging in some wayward youth to try to make sure they don't follow his path. I wouldn't classify him as a gun control wonk. There were certainly some points he made with which I would disagree, but I think in many of the discussion points he brought up on stage and then afterwards when he and I were catching up, you know, he showed that when he was involved in criminal activity, the laws that were put on the books supposedly to deter access to guns by gang members and criminals really didn't do much to prevent him back in the day from getting a gun and committing crimes. So I thought it was interesting to hear that perspective from somebody who wasn't disenfranchised by gun control laws.
Well, absolutely. I was actually going to ask if that was brought up and whether or not Mr. Pacheco felt like there were any gun laws on the books that were effective at preventing access to guns by gang members.
Most of what Juan did was to put up some statistics that you and I and the listeners have heard ad nauseum. There wasn't really anything groundbreaking. Okay. But I will say one point on a macro level is I think some of the points that Juan brought up, if we as a nation and elected officials could focus more on the human problems and the human challenges we face in putting kids on a good, solid path, we could have a far more productive debate that would probably lead to more beneficial results than if we continue to focus on the inanimate object that some of these criminals use to commit crimes.
You know, and to that end, one of the write-ups that I saw about the debate, Glenn, mentioned a point in the debate where Juan Pacheco was talking about what he would do if he were the victim of a home invasion, and he said, was this true that he went on to say that he would not fight back if there was a home invader?
He did say that. You know, he was relying on the better instincts of man to comply with a criminal and hope that would be enough to have your life spared or be spared from any physical harm. You and I know in the real world that we don't know what's in the head of a criminal who purports to only want to steal your stereo or steal your television. And this young man, you know, made a very compelling point that he said he didn't feel physically confident enough that he could defend himself with his feet and fists, and for him, the best choice he thought would be a firearm, and he was taken aback that Juan felt that he shouldn't have that right to defend himself. And, you know, one of the points that I made at the end of the day is this issue really boils down to choice. You know, if people on the other side never choose to exercise their Second Amendment rights and get a gun, that's their choice. But I find it hypocritical and offensive for them to not have tolerance and allow the 100 million Americans who currently choose to exercise that right to do so peacefully.
Absolutely. And, you know, unfortunately, we see these stories every day, Glenn, where where people are killed by these home invaders. They're killed by robbers for no reason whatsoever. And I know that that mindset, we've all heard it of, you know, put your trust in the hands of that person who is robbing you, who is assaulting you, and just have faith that they won't take your life. That seems, you know, look, if that's Mr. Pacheco's philosophy, that's great, but there's no way that Mr. Pacheco or any other gun control advocate could compel their fellow Americans to to give up their right of self-defense and to live this way.
No, you're exactly right. I think that's why we can't rely on the quote-unquote goodwill of a criminal to not commit harm upon us, and that's why ILA's efforts to expand right to carry laws, to expand places where we can legally use self-defense are of utmost importance, because we want to make sure that in that moment where a law-abiding citizen has to decide how or if to defend himself, they can do so legally and with the comfort knowing that they're not going to get sued if they use a firearm to defend themselves from criminal attack.
So I'm curious, Glenn, what kind of questions did you get from the students there in the audience? Did you get some good ones?
I really did. You know, it's interesting. The students did a fantastic job putting this together. They took both speakers, both of us, out to dinner prior to kind of go over the groundwork and what they hoped to accomplish. There were probably close to 300 folks in attendance. Most of them were students, but some of them were from the non-student population. And at dinner, I asked one of the student leaders how he would describe the political makeup of the campus. And he said it's about a third conservative, a third liberal, and a third moderate. And truth be told, Cam, of the questions I got, they were very reflective of his position. There were quite a few questions that you could tell folks were sympathetic with the NRA's position. There were quite a few questions where people were certainly hostile toward the NRA. And then there were questions right in the middle where people were just seeking answers to questions they didn't know as opposed to trying to make a political statement. So I thought it was very well-rounded.
That is fantastic to hear, and again, congratulations to the students at the University of Tennessee, because, you know, we do see so many stories, Glenn, that free speech is sort of confined to a free speech zone on campus, or if goodness gracious, I mean, there are probably some campuses out there where it seems like simply you being invited to campus would be a microaggression targeted at some anti-gun member of the student body, and you know, it could turn into a big thing. So I'm glad to see that there are universities out there who are hosting debates like this. I hope we see a lot more of it.
You know, as am I think we are going to see more and more of that. And I will say that in most of the campuses I've gone to, usually when I raise the arguments from the NRA side and I talk about the non-legislative activities that we do, the firearm safety, the training, the Eddie Eagle, most of what they're hearing for the first time because they're not exposed to both sides of the debate. So I think anytime we get the opportunity in a fair and open forum to present our case to allow students to make up their minds based on firsthand knowledge from the organization, rather something that's filtered through third-hand through the media, we're in a position to enlighten students and teach them about the truth and maybe even get a few of those folks to join the NRA and join our fight in spreading the message.
Absolutely. And given the number of folks in attendance here, it seems like this is a subject that students are interested in.
Absolutely.
Well, listen, Glenn, I appreciate you coming on the program, and glad that it went so well. Let us know when you've got another debate coming up, will you?
Will do. Hopefully we can do this again.
Absolutely. Glen Caroline, the Division Director for nra-ila Grassroots.